I answered for, Governor Abbott for Texas. I can also answer for HISD as well. This is not rocket science, right? You're talking about a district one, and I'm not defending HISD and the board and the shenanigans that's going on, but I'm also not going to sit here and act like the state hadn't been complicit in the problems of HISD. And when you tax a district like HISD in the manner in which it did, taking tens of millions of dollars from that district, then you're bound to have problems. When you participate in the shenanigans of HISD taking over North Forest Independent School District, and according to the superintendent, it was because the governor said, the state said that they had to take that district over when that district had no competency to run a low-income, socioeconomic challenge region. That, yes, the state has been complicit in why HISD is failing. And now you see the overflow or the runoff as a result.
Well, those may be factors, but there's a lot more that's going on in Houston ISD. There's, there's all kinds of things that have gone on. There's a lot of complicated details that need to be examined. And it's been going on for a long time. So
is it anything bigger?
The bottom line,
teachers would not want to work in Houston ISD.
The bottom line on teaching, though, is that Texas and every place else in America benefited from the fact that women were restricted to very few jobs. One of them was teaching, and so extraordinary women were becoming teachers that now are becoming lawyers and doctors and all the other avenues that are open to them. And you can't keep, at some point you're gonna have to say, look, if you want quality people to go into education, you're gonna have to pay them.
Hey, everybody, let me jump in here. We're on Overtime, Facebook audience, Overtime audience. This is where some of the good stuff happens. Hey, I want to start with the other crisis. Well, we've all had our eyeballs on Ukraine and our concerns.
I haven't.
We still have a big time crisis on our border. Bob Price has been down there reporting breaking news. You had an exclusive with Governor Abbott, didn't you?
I did. For the fourth time this year, Governor Abbott asked me to come down and speak with him about the border. And we had a couple of very interesting conversations this time in Eagle Pass, Texas, sitting in front of a more than an acre of 30-foot steel bollard wall, border wall panels that the state of Texas acquired free of charge from the Biden administration before the Biden administration figured out what they were doing and getting it through the government surplus program. Texas acquired these panels, and now we'll use those panels that Joe Biden promised would never be built for a border wall. We're going to build the Texas border wall on private property at the donation of the property owners in order to help move along the security of this border. The numbers again in February that were just released last week are up again. It was the highest February since the year 2000, which was the first year that Border Patrol started tracking this under the new U.S. Customs and Border Protection created at that time. It's an astronomical number of people that are coming across. And Title 42, the coronavirus prevention protocol, is on the verge of being eliminated. That is the only thing that has been holding people back from getting in, when about 50 to 60% of the people that got in were turned back under Title 42. Absent that, the number of people entering the interior of the United States will jump very quickly up to 2 million people a year. These are not these are not asylum-seeking migrants. These are economic migrants who are looking to come here to the United States and in record numbers in an uncontrolled, unidentifiable fashion, and it's just pure chaos. He also took, in one of the segments of the interview, he took an interesting swipe at his November opponent, Beto Robert Francis O'Rourke, who famously said again last week that the deployment of the National Guard to the border is a solution in search of a problem. Well, I did some research on that, and I found that that's a phrase that Beto, like Robert Francis O'Rourke, likes to use continuously, and apparently he does not recognize that the hundreds of people dying is a problem, that the millions of people coming into this country is a problem, that the crime, the registered sex offenders, convicted sex offenders that are crossing the border, the child traffickers, the children being abandoned at the border, he doesn't see that that's a problem. And to me, that is very indicative as Governor Abbott said, that if Beto was elected as governor, border security in Texas would come to an end.
Bob, did you talk to anybody in Eagle Pass as to whether they really feel threatened by anyone coming over from
Absolutely. Absolutely, Chris. I've talked with dozens of people that live down there in these ranches. Imagine you're sitting outside with your family.
No, I have talked to them too, Bob. Talked to them, and they basically have had a joint society for
let me answer the question.
Years.
Are you going to let me answer the question that you asked? You asked me if I talked to them. Yes, I have. Imagine you're sitting in your yard with your family, having a barbecue in the backyard, and suddenly 50 people come marching through your backyard. You don't know who they are. You don't know why they're there. You don't know what their intent is. You don't know if they're armed or if they're carrying diseases to subject your family to. That's the lives that these people are living through. Ranchers.
And who did that happen to that you talked to, Bob?
Ranchers are driving
to that you talked to.
I don't know where you guys are from, but when we throw barbecues, we have people show up randomly all the time.
Look, I want to say this. I want to say to what Chris said about dual societies. Hold on, dual societies. Yeah, I'm Chris. You may not know this. My family lives in Laredo, Texas. I know what the dual society looks like. Some people living the way Laredo, working on this side, and vice versa. That's not what Bob's talking about. We're talking about tens of thousands of foreign nationals hammering through people's private property. Some with and mixed among them are drug traffickers pushing fentanyl, pushing weapons, pushing cocaine and heroin, as an overwhelmed border patrol is trying to contend with it. I'm going to shift this. If there was ever any impetus for bipartisan immigration reform, this is it. Now, I'm going to ask you to use your experience down there. What has kept Congress from upgrading immigration law from the days of the Reagan administration?
The same reason we had the law in the days of the Reagan administration, because our society and economy depends on this open border. What are we talking about? I've said this for weeks, for months, for years. The United States of America is complicit with the importation of labor. It's that simple. And we take the good with the bad. We take the consequences with the pros. And while it may have morphed into something else today than cheap labor, it's still labor, right? We still benefit from the labor that comes across that border. If you don't believe me, go into any hotel. If you don't believe me, go into any agricultural farm. If you don't believe me, go and see who's changing your sheets when you stay in whatever hotel you stay in. It's just a fact of and we're lying to ourselves that it doesn't exist. Now, why hasn't it changed since then? Since the cheap labor thing has gone away and it's just labor, is because one of the parties thinks it's okay and the other party thinks it's not, and it's now a political argument rather than a process for improvement.
I'd like to hear Chris's answer to your question.
By the way, it's a
I want to ask Chris something. You know, why do you think
that wasn't to me? I thought that was to me.
No comprehensive immigration reform?
Well, obviously it's difficult politically, and it's sad because I agree with you. There should be, and I don't. But when you're and Bob, the reason I get upset is because in my experience and in visiting Eagle Pass, nowhere did I see a more. They used to share a fire department, Eagle Pass and Piedras Negras. I mean,
that's absolutely right.
It was just, it was, a very, very open border and very, very open community. And they were proud of that. And I think when you, and I don't really disagree with Greg that some bad things are, bad apples are coming across. But as I forget, it was the president of IBC Bank in Laredo who told me, as long as you have people living in cardboard boxes on mudslide hills, they're going to find a way to come into the United States. And so there are so many different factors involved in all of this and the immigration question. And so, but villainizing people and trying to paint with this broad brush and trying to pretend that everybody coming over the border is doing so to do harm to the United States is
You said that, Chris.
Yeah, amen. That's what I
Go
was
ahead,
just
Chau.
scary proposition to throw this baby out with the bathwater. You know, the women and the children, the families are coming here out of desperation. And yes, there are people coming seeking asylum, afraid for their lives in their respective countries. And so when you clump all these immigrants coming together, trying to cross the border for a better life, contributing to our economy, paying sales tax, those things, right? Building our, cleaning our homes, mowing our lawns, you forget that that is part of the fabric of this country. And as an immigrant, now, granted, I came from the other side of the world as an asylum seeker with my family. I just ask people, there go I, but for the grace of God. I mean, put yourself in the shoes of a woman and a child and a family so desperate to come over here. And let us not forget, it was Reagan that granted asylum to hundreds of thousands of Mexican immigrants, including my former nanny, who still has a picture of Reagan above her piano wall, because, you know, she came over here with a coyote, with babies, desperate to have a life. And she has had a great life. And so, you know, we put the partisan politics aside and just think about the humanity of people.
Holly, we can map the human genome. We can put the entire contents of the Library of Congress on a microchip. We can't figure out how to do a really innovative, effective form of immigration. And, you know, as a political observer, it has been a wedge issue. It has been a base issue, and neither side has dealt in good faith in terms of solving the problem.
It does seem that way. And I think everyone has made a good point about we're lumping together these different groups. And it goes on both sides of the argument, though, because, you know, when Republicans say we need to have a more secure border and an orderly immigration process, then you have the opposition say, well, you know, the women and children, and that's valid in asylum seekers, but we are not really helping those people when we allow for the situation on the border to be uncontrolled and chaotic. We do need to have vetting. We do need to, you know, make sure that we are not allowing criminal elements to come back and forth across the border, like the suspect who shot the Harris County constable. Everyone knew that man had been moving freely across the border since at least 1995. And the police were aware of him. They knew where to look for him, right? They did apprehend him on the other side of the border. There is a problem. If we want to help asylum seekers, if we want to help those who are looking for a better way of life, we don't allow for a chaotic and uncontrolled situation. We have controls, we have a secure border, and we do, you know, create a path for these people. I think, you know, as Marcus has alluded to, Marcus and I have talked about this before, there's not political will, there's not you know, an interest in really solving the problem, because both parties can use it as a wedge issue in elections. When Republicans had control of Congress and had opportunities to do something about this, they really didn't do what they could have done. And, you know, likewise, the Democrats like to have the issue open too.
Greg, you mentioned a number of things that we've done, right? And these were great tasks that we're capable of doing them. The reason we were able to do those things is because we wanted to. That's the difference. We don't want to pass real immigration reform, right? We don't want to. One, because we know that the impact it will have on our economy. Two, because we know that we will lose it as a political argument. We don't truly want to pass it. If you don't believe me, look at 2008 or 2009 and 2010 when the Democrats had the House, the Senate, and the White House. They didn't pass it. Look at when the Trump administration had the House, the Senate, and the White House. They didn't pass it. We don't have an interest in passing it for real, for real.
I want to add one other thing. You know, I think Chris had an interesting point talking about Eagle Pass and the way things were at one point. I do think there's been also a change, right? So, you know, it's not the way it was 20 years ago. It's not the way it was during the Reagan administration. There's more crime. There's the manufactured drugs that are being shifted over from China into the US. They're coming across the border. They're extremely dangerous. They're contributing to our costs as taxpayers as we grapple with this drug crisis. I mean, things have changed, and policy needs to adjust as well.
That's
hey,
fair.
Newsflash, violence erupted in the Mexican border town of Nuevo Laredo overnight near the U.S. consulate's office and forced 2 international bridges to close. after Mexican army officials arrested a high-ranking drug cartel leader. Hey, by the way, if y'all haven't noticed, it's a failed state on the frontera. The government is not in control. It is crazy. My brother-in-law told me that his housekeeper who lives across it sounded like a war zone. There was so much automatic gunfire and explosions. There is no dual economy anymore on the local level. You can't go to a border town and not risk your life. It's nuts. That's just the background, the backdrop for this massive influx of folks who weren't invited here. Now, to Bob's or to Marcus's point, yeah, I think that the Chamber of Commerce branch of the Republican Party has always winked and said, yeah, we're for tougher border laws, except we need all of this cheap labor to keep, framing costs down and kitchen costs down. And hey, our local healthcare safety net will provide free healthcare for them. And, it'll help our bottom line. There has been an essential hypocrisy there, in my opinion. I don't know, but it's a mess down there, and we've kind of been distracted by Ukraine, and it's not getting a whole lot better. Bob, am I correct?
No, it's not getting any better at all. In fact, it's getting ready to get much, much, much worse. And that's going to be foretold here in the next couple of months. Chris's lack of an answer to your question about this is very telling about what's going on in Congress. This is not a complicated process, but they make it complicated by trying to do the whole thing in one big package of legislation. It's real easy. You break it into pieces. You secure the border first. You make sure that we get the border secure. Then you create immigration laws that allow for the easy movement of people into the United States through an identifiable process where those people meet the needs of the U.S. economy, and then you use asylum for what asylum is, people that are in danger. You fix our asylum laws, you fix our immigration laws, you do those in pieces and not in some massive 5,000-page bill that Congresses want to do now because nobody reads the things, you just pass them, and let's get it done. The reason it's not getting done is exactly right, because Republicans and Democrats in Washington, D.C. do not want the problem to go away. It's very easy to fix. It's not complicated at all.
Chris, do you want to say anything to that?
Well, one thing Bob left out is a pathway to citizenship. And until that's part of the package, then you really aren't talking about any real reform. And so that I certainly agree. You have to, but it's all drama at this point. I mean, we're talking about building the wall. I mean, we've had fences and what have you, and that'll be part of the process. But you hire more border patrol agents. You take a greater advantage of technology with drones and what have you to guard wider swaths of the border. But you also have to have a pathway to citizenship.
Why is that a must?
Raised is that you have to have that workforce, and to pretend
why is that a must though, Chris? Why is a path to citizenship a must? I'm asking. We obviously we have not been.
People who are already here, and because of what you just said in terms of our labor force here in the United States and here in Texas, you can't eliminate that. And you have people who've been living here for years and years, breaking no laws, contributing a great deal to the economy. And we're really going to pretend that you're just going to send all the folks back.
I can answer your question.
No, that's not what I said. I just asked why was it a must? I don't know that I would say that a path to citizenship or not equates to shipping folks away, because there's no path to citizenship today, and we're not shipping them away in droves. I'm constantly amazed that we believe we can solve the problems of Ukraine and Russia, and we haven't been able to solve our own problems right here in between the United States and Mexico. It is astonishing that we believe we can take on all the issues across the globe and tend to them, send billions of dollars, and I mean, every day the news cycle starts in the morning at 5 a.m. and it goes until 5 a.m. the next day talking about Ukraine. What we're talking about now is an impactful on all of Texas and all of the United States of America, and we don't give it nearly the light that it needs in order to be solved.
Well, I suggest that there's a lot of people.
Hold on, everybody. We're running out of time. I want to go back to what I think was our second lead today, which is what happens next in terms of Lena Hidalgo and leadership of Harris County, the implications for the November election. Chau made the point that she didn't think a lot of people were paying attention. I do believe the 30% of midterm voters, or the 30% of the registered voters who will vote in the midterm are paying attention. And I don't think this is going away. When you have the debacle of the primary election on top of an ongoing crime wave, on top of a pending federal lawsuit by the Deputies Association about the mess that is the Harris County Jail, the death trap that it is, I think that there's a cumulative effect. We're talking about leadership and the path forward. Now, is this a blue county? I do believe so. But if Republicans ever had a chance to regain control, this is it, because they've got a lot to hang their hat on. Holly, your thoughts?
Yes, I think you're absolutely right. I mean, everybody's paying attention, and it does not help that the party in power at the national level is affiliated with Hidalgo and local Democrats. People are very unhappy. Their pocketbooks are hurting. As we talked about, inflation, it hit nearly 8% in February. This is before the Ukrainian crisis exploded. So although the administration is desperately trying to blame Putin for all of the problems, everyone knows that they were already ramping up. We were already suffering prior to this. This is a big distraction. And for some Democrats, they're hoping that this will help, save them for this midterm election. But I think, that also plays into these local elections. Even though we don't have straight ticket voting anymore, people are going to look at that and see that affiliation and add to all the local problems. I think Democrats may be in trouble this year.
Chau, any thoughts? I mean, look, you may have a rebuttal to what I just said. Look, if you're Lena Hidalgo and you're looking at the same affidavit that all of us looked at from the Texas Rangers of what they already have in hand, do you keep those 3 staffers, or do you cut them loose and say, hey, I should have been watching closer because this is not the way I promised to do business?
She's included in some of the communication.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right.
So I don't think it's, I read that rather closely to see if she was being copied. And the problem is that, she's cast herself as being above all this, that it wasn't going to be county politics as usual, not taking contributions from certain folks and what have you. And then to see that it's politics as usual. But I think Chau's right that we're going to see if people are really, it depends on where it goes from here. And it's going to have to get a little sexier before people are really going to start paying attention to it.
Here's a question. Oh, sorry, Chau.
Just people are worried about crime. They're worried about felony bond reform. Those are the 2 things on the minds of, I think, local Houstonians right now. And I think that will weigh in on whatever, the outcomes of the elections. When it comes to Lena, I think you got to let this investigation play out. And she's the top, she's the leader of this county, and she's going to have to be held accountable if she's going to be held accountable. And she's spoken her piece for now. I mean, the mayor went through some issues with housing recently, and that seemed to have kind of gone away. And, he's still pretty popular.
I wouldn't count on that. Bob, what's your take on all this?
Well, we need to remember that her being put into office was a result of the last year that we allowed straight ticket voting in Harris County and in the state of Texas. She was swept in, an unqualified candidate. Judge Emmett didn't even really know he was in a race and wasn't campaigning effectively. He said that repeatedly. And she was swept in, an unqualified candidate was swept in. And now you see the incompetence rolling out and what happens when you have someone without the political experience, someone without the judgment, someone without the skills to manage what would be the 26th largest state in the United States if it was a state. You're seeing the consequences of that now, and the taxpayers are going to pay for that. If I could go back just real quickly to answer Marcus's question about why citizenship requirement is an absolute must in Chris's words. The reason you don't need citizenship to work in this country. You don't need citizenship, and there is a pathway to citizenship. You enter the immigration system legally, you go through the process, and you become a citizen. The reason it's a must-have situation for Democrats is they want those votes. That is all it's about, and they know it's a poison pill that they can put into any bill, and it kills that bill and keeps it from moving forward.
Marcus, I'm a little troubled. I'm troubled that you would have us believe that it is just the regular course of duty that multi-million-dollar contracts in government are just rigged, and that, hey, well, just the way it is. Is that what you're saying?
Here's what I'm saying.
Question to
That was Marcus.
me. Okay.
You're troubled by that. What I'm troubled by, and I hadn't heard anyone mention it. Anybody concerned about the timing of this? Where was this a month ago? Right? Where was it? Why didn't this come out before the primary? I think it would have been valuable to the voters to know this before the primary took place. I think we would have had, you asked, would it have made a difference? I think it would have had a much greater impact and we didn't have to know the whole story. We just needed to know those emails were there, right? We just needed to know that she was copied on them. And I think voters would have had a different response, potentially, possibly. I don't know why it came out later. Maybe, and it probably will benefit the GOP or the Republicans in November. But as I stated to our good friend Gary Powell, hey, if the GOP wanted Lena out, they should have participated in the Democratic primary instead of waiting for November. That was an easy out there, but they chose. They chose not to do it.
70% of the Democratic vote. Lena did.
Right. Which was amazing, absolutely amazing. But to answer your question, Greg, I believe when people do things so freely, so easily, you have to ask why. And it may have something to do with the culture of the organizations or institutions. You can't nobody walked in there and decided to do something so brazen, that had never been done before. This is obviously there was a blueprint for this. Obviously, there was a map for this.
The emails and text messages do demonstrate a certain carelessness and brazenness about the communications. I mean, they're shocking to the public, right? But that is rather telling.
Yeah,
Holly, what you mentioned was them being careless with emails, not being careless with what they were doing. Being careless with telling people what you're doing versus being careless with what you're doing are two different things.
Hey, Chris, what do you think in terms of damage control? There's some Chinese shoe, high dollar consultants who are probably going to be called in and say, like, how do we fix this? How do we limit the damage? What do you think they're telling her?
Well, it kind of it goes back to what maybe like that emoji that was used in a lot of those text messages, hang loose. I was saying about that where is this going to go and is it going to play out? Because the housing controversy that she brought up, when I first read that, I'm like, man, I mean, this stinks, but it hasn't gone anywhere. Nothing's happened. This is kind of, complicated. Some people might say inside baseball and just lose interest. And if it keeps going,
unless there's indictment,
stuff keeps coming out about connections, what have you, and why, guys. Then it becomes a different story.
As long as it's a Democrat versus a Republican, this means nothing. Why? Because no Democrat is going to go to the polls in this hyper-partisan era we live in. No Democrats are going to go to the poll, very few, 1%, and say, I'm not voting for Lena because she did this. And as a result, I'm going to vote for the Republican candidate. That's just not going to happen.
Marcus,
The same way Republicans.
Bob brought up a good point, though, about straight ticket voting.
Oh, no, I'm with you on that. But I'm talking about, here's a great example. Here's a great example. Ken Paxton is in his primary, right?
Not against Lena.
Close with
no, I'm saying, why is Ken Paxton still there? Because the Republicans, they're only interested in who can beat the Democrat. It doesn't matter if these parties say it doesn't matter if my guy is dirty, as long as my team wins.
Well,
and in November, as long as the team wins, they don't care what Lena may or may not have done. Hell, there's a bigger catastrophe that took place when the coup happened with the Harris County Commissioners Court. When you decided to just take over so that was voter suppression, right? I voted for Tanisha Hudspeth to be the person in charge of elections. When you took her authority away, you suppressed my vote. And nobody cried about that big coup that took place. So no, we don't care.
If our good friend Bill King is right, and I've seen the polling, and there's multiple polls that show that a third of American voters don't identify with either party. And we'll assume there's a substantial block of independent voters in the greater Harris County area. Now, who do they break with? Do they break left or do they break right? Do they stick with Lena or do they look at somebody like Alex Mueller or Vidal Martinez and say, you know something, all that stuff that's happened at Harris County in the last year, I constantly see on the newscast, and even now frequently in the Houston Chronicle, certainly on the pages of the Texan, I think we need a change. And so to your argument, Marcus, that people are going to hold their nose and he may be a crook, but he's my crook. Yeah, but the swing voters in Harris County and throughout the country are independent and don't identify with either side. Is that, that's my statement.
I got it if you got a clarifying question. Did you just say that the county's largest coupon delivery service is actually committing random acts of journalism?
Well, we're all waiting for Lisa Falkenberg's editorial on the latest round of problems at Harris County's, what's it, 1001 Preston? I mean, look, if everybody is lawyered up now, and they're not cheap lawyers. And you notice something in those documents, you didn't see any warrants served on Felicity Freya. Wonder why? Perhaps she's cut her own deal because she's right in the middle of this. The other thing is, when you look at the situation and you look at it against the background, this is a Democratic district attorney. And note to self, hey, if there's a district attorney who has control over public integrity prosecutions in my county, perhaps I should think hard about granting her the 100 additional prosecutors she asked for 3 years ago in an ongoing crime wave. How about that for some editorializing?
You also have the Democrat-controlled county attorney's office who has the statutory authority to remove the county judge, and there's no action being taken there either.
Anyway,
I've heard, I think that's at least the second time I've heard it being mentioned that this is a Democratic district attorney.
Yes.
Do we all agree that that's true?
That is true.
That is true.
That is true.
She should be far enough left for George Soros, but she is a Democrat district attorney.
There's an old term, Chris, right? The enemy of my enemy is my friend.
Oh, certainly at the county. I mean, more so than anywhere else. I mean, and then just figuring out who the enemies are and the friends are, and that, I'm not connected enough anymore to know the personalities and involved in all this, but I think that's what's going to be most fascinating. Who is Felicity Freya? Do you know?
Oh yeah, yeah. She's, you know, she's a political operative. She worked on Adrian Garcia's campaign. She did some census work.
Worked for Hillary Clinton's presidential campaign and for the Democrat National Committee.
And when we started looking at the subs on this, they were all political campaign operations with very little public health outreach in their portfolio. So
and there's a similar story
and how
in
is
Fort
how is
Bend
that
County.
different? Sorry, what'd
There's
you
a
say,
similar-
Holly?
I said there's a similar story in Fort Bend County, which has also done a COVID outreach or a COVID vaccine outreach contract with a Democrat strategist who has affiliations with Commissioner Rodney Ellis. I think the other thing that a lot of people want to know is what's happening with all of these COVID dollars that are being strewn around the country through all these local governments. You know, what is the accountability on these dollars? You know, are they really efficacious, or are we just creating a big payout for a lot of strategists who helped get Biden elected?
Hey, what happened to the firm that was hired by Greg Abbott for the COVID tracking? That they paid millions of dollars and they had no track record. Are they still around? And I haven't heard anything about the work that they performed.
That's a good question.
Good question,
got
because
my hand full
those-
here, Chris.
But
I have my hands full here.
Likewise.
Sounds like deflection to me.
But it sounds like a great question that you know.
Absolutely, absolutely.
You know?
it was what was it? It was a $13 million contract or something, wasn't it?
Yep.
That they were going to track.
When you say you know, you look at the subs and you know few of them have public health experience. How much different is that than some of the contracts that we see in construction in the city or in the county, where somebody gets a contract to do porta potties and they have no experience doing that, or get a contract to put out flags and barrels and they have no experience doing that? This is not out of the norm. I'm not saying that people don't have the capacity or the ability to do what they were subbed to do, but it is not uncommon for somebody to get a piece of a contract that they've not done before. The question is, can they do that job, right?
Here, let me ask you this. Like anybody who goes to IH knows, like Marcus has a restaurant out there. Did you have to compete for that one? What was that process like?
So here's the thing. Yes, you have to compete. And but it's part of a package, right? These are contracts that are part of packages, and we have to partner with a big concessionaire. And the concessionaire has to have experience in doing these things. But when you get down to, you know, the smaller slices, that's a different story.
This is kind of like a personal and business question, but was it worth it? The process going through it?
Look, I'm an H-Town guy. I like as the song say, I put on for my city to represent, you know, being able to represent and reflect. And I had to, it wasn't something, just so you asked the question, this wasn't something I sought after, right? But this was a fight that we started when I was on the Convention Visitors Bureau board about how do we get more exposure for the great things in the city of Houston, and hospitality was part of that conversation. And when we came to realize that even in our airport, I'm just using numbers because this was 15 years ago and I remember the exact numbers, but we had 1 million people that passed through the city of Houston that never touched Houston soil, right? But they were only in the airport and they never saw or tasted or felt Houston. So this idea of putting Houston concepts inside, and at the time we had all of these Top Chef winners and people didn't know it. So that was part of how this came. So when it came back, I was like, you can't run your mouth and then not show up to the party. So
hey guys,
is it worth it representing for the city of Houston? Yes. Do I love
hey, we've got
stores?
5 minutes left, and as we like to do on overtime, to give everybody an opportunity to talk about what we've missed or have a burning desire. Holly's been skiing and globe trotting. I'm not even going to say the secret location Chau's at. Chris is out there
I was
in
wondering
God's
about the
country
backdrop
with the cows and good sausage, right?
I am. No
That's the other-
cows.
Very nice.
Bob's on
That's
his
the ocean.
palatial lake estate, and Marcus is going to work right after the show.
But right now,
Bob, I'm going to start with you. What are we missing out there?
Well, we're probably not missing a whole lot because we're such a good panel in putting all these things together. My favorite topic, of course, is always the border, and we're seeing these issues continue across the border. One of the interesting things that Governor Abbott said in the interview was that the Texas National Guard and the Texas Military Department, Texas Department of Public Safety are doing a really good job of diverting these migrants from crossing into Texas and pushing them out to somewhere else where they become what I call an SEP, somebody else's problem. You're seeing a big spike now in the Yuma sector. You're seeing more migrants crossing into the San Diego sector and El Centro sector in California. So Governor Abbott's responsibility is to the people of the state of Texas. And he's doing a really good job in dealing with this issue and moving it to becoming an SEP.
Follow-up question real quick. I just happen to know you live with a very skilled attorney. Did you happen to share the warrant documents with her, and what were her opinion of the evidence that the Texas Rangers have in their possession?
I did share it with her, and I have not yet heard back her opinion, although don't be surprised if there's not an article in a major national news organization about it.
Okay. Chau Ngyuen, what's going on with you, girlfriend?
Well, it's, I'm a work in the domestic violence space, and we're always very concerned about the escalating violence, looking at the numbers, spikes in calls, severity of violence. It is Women's History Month, mind you. So we're very mindful of lifting the voices of vulnerable, marginalized women. We had a gun violence memorial come through town, thanks to the Giffords organization, and posted, thousands of those who've lost their lives at the hands of gun violence. So I just, crime, violence is really on the minds, and I hope that people take to account that, this is happening in their communities, and everybody has a vested interest to speak up and do everything they can to stay safe.
All right, Holly, what's going on over at the Texan that we're missing?
Oh, there's all kinds of things going on. We were watching, especially the impact of inflation and energy prices on the state of Texas. I did want to talk a little bit more. We ran out of time, but the whole Ukrainian issue is related to energy as well, and that's something that needs to be looked at both on the foreign stage and on the domestic stage. I mean, these are huge issues, and we cannot continue to pretend that wind and solar power is already technologically advanced enough for us to rely on at this point. These European nations are still importing natural gas and coal from Russia. They're very dependent on Russia. China continues to build coal plants, more so than I think all of the other countries in the world combined. So we need to be realistic about how we're getting our energy and what is required to keep people living. Those issues need to be delved into, and we need to learn a lot from what happened here, and we need to stop restricting American energy producers and making sure that Americans have access. Speaking of the airport, I have to take a college student to the airport here in about 5 minutes to get back to school after a spring break. So I'm watching the clock really closely.
Yeah, on that issue really quickly, understanding climate challenges, but to ask an entire state to leave literally $1 trillion worth of wealth in the ground that is they see as their their legacy, as their inheritance, is a tough ask against human nature.
It's not just that. I mean, we have all this rhetoric out there that we're going to make Houston 100% reliant on renewables. Well, that's just simply not feasible. It's not doable. I mean, you could present that on paper, but Germany shut down their coal, and even European countries are shutting down their nuclear plants, but they're having to import these fossil fuels from Russia. So there's some smoke and mirrors going on there that makes people feel better about doing something about climate change, but it's not realistic at this point.
All right, Chris Bell, look, former congressman, former city council member, current very smart guy. I'm glad you're back in the Houston area so we can access you and your expertise. Anything on your mind that you'd like to talk about as we close out the program? We're leaving it to our senior member, well, with Bob, the original Marcus Davis, to close. Chris, any thoughts?
Well, I really like what Holly said, and climate change is the perfect issue that you can look at and see why our system is so broken. And in Texas, we're at a perfect position to lead. We have huge alternative resources, but we also have fossil fuels. And if you move completely away from fossil fuels, A, that's never going to happen. And B, it would crush us, the entire state. And so we don't talk about these things in realistic terms. And that's extraordinarily frustrating for me, and why I've joined the third party. So anyway, but the other thing that has come to mind to me of late, I also, as you mentioned, have a place in Chapel Hill, and I have an office here and in Houston, and relaunched my solo practice and practicing both places. But the disconnect between urban and rural Texas is just really extraordinary to me now. And the young people here are actually nice to you in the supermarket. They actually try to help you find things at Home Depot. It's just, I'm thought, are they screwing with me, or are they really, is this an aberration? Or no, it's just a different mindset. I had a leaf blower left by the prior owner of our home that I could not get to start, and had other people try to start it, and it wasn't happening. So I did what we do in Houston. I put it out in front of my home. It did get picked up rather quickly, but then the young man who picked it up came to my house, not once, but twice, to see if I had forgotten my leaf blower. I said, no, I'm sorry, that's just what we do in Houston. If we're ready to get rid of something, we just put it out front. But he wanted to make sure. Twice, 2 trips to my house. And so it's just an incredible, and broadband access, another thing that we've been talking about, 20 years, 10 years at least, lack of broadband access in rural areas. It's a huge problem. It is a huge problem. But if you don't live it, you don't care about it. Since the majority of votes come from the urban areas, no one does anything about it. But once you experience the frustration, you're like, why haven't they done anything about broadband access? Anyway.
All right.
How about that?
Well, my goal,
Chris on.
my hope is for that day when Marcus Davis's level of cynicism is crushed by his level of optimism. We're not even close to that yet. We're not even close to that yet. And so we close our program today with my good friend Marcus Davis, who I know has probably multiple issues to talk to, but pick one.
I'll pick one. Before I pick it, let me just give a shout out to Texas Southern University, my alma mater, for making it to the big dance. We've gone like 4 times in the last 5 years, something like that. As soon as we get rid of this archaic system of automatically deeming HBCUs as 16 seeds and allow us to be 15, 14, 13, 12 seeds, and we won't have to play the number 1. We won't be ousted in the first round. All right, with that being said, congratulations to the team, to Coach Johnny, and we're looking forward to a great season next year. That being said, we talked about the feds and the interest rate. One thing that we didn't talk about was the people who got left out of participating in the low interest rate before the feds decided to hike it, and those were all of the folks that applied for home equity loans with Wells Fargo and were denied the opportunity to reduce their costs over the next several years, to transfer more wealth to their families over the next several years, because the Wells Fargo decided to practice racism and deny more people of color the opportunity to be approved for those loans. It's astounding for those who don't understand or don't believe that systemic or systematic, whichever one you choose, if not both, racism still exists. Then look at things like Wells Fargo and their practices and how they decided to not allow the participation of transference of wealth in the African American community by denying those home equity loans or refinance.
Wells Fargo, bad actor. This is not their first scandal. Anyway, we'll see if they, that we'll hear their side of the story, but it looked pretty clear. Marcus pointed it out to me. Everybody, thank you for your time, your expertise, your friendship. Have a great week. Hope to have you all back.
Thanks, Brad.
Okay,
Thanks,
Bam.
Greg.
Bam.